Hello and welcome to Top Story, which today looks at the storm that has engulfed the head of the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, who stirred up a furious reaction around the world last week when he suggested that the adoption of some parts of Islamic Sharia law were unavoidable in Britain. The Anglican Communion makes up tens of millions of people worldwide, most of whom live side by side with Muslims. The Archbishop told a gathering of senior church figures on Monday that some of what is reported to have been said was a very long way from the reality. He had, for instance, never advocated a parallel set of Islamic laws in Britain. Dr. Williams was criticised at the weekend by his predecessor, Lord Carey, who said the acceptance of some Muslim laws would be disastrous for Britain. Well, joining us now to discuss the question of the relationship between religion and the state and the case for accommodating some of the legal codes of minority religions is the Reverend Philip Mount Stephen, chaplain of the Anglican Church of St. Michael here in Paris. Thanks very much for being on Top Stories.
Thank you.
So what did he really say?
What did he really say? I think part of the problem is that people aren't really quite sure what the Archbishop said. He's an incredibly intelligent man, but he has no particular gift for the soundbite. He was speaking, the first speech that he gave was to a large gathering of legal experts, but it was preceded by this short interview, and I think that's what the media really picked up on. But essentially what the Archbishop was trying to do was to explore the place of religious faith in public life. Now that's a very hot issue in many ways in the United Kingdom, and of course the UK and France have completely different traditions. France has essentially answered the question, what place does religion have in public life, by saying, well, it doesn't really have any at all, although President Sarkozy has perhaps just begun to open the door slightly on that. But of course we have a very different tradition in England, and we have a long tradition that says that no, religion does have a place to play in public life. Though really for the last 200 years or so, those things have been separated, and religion has been sort of sidelined to the private sphere. But what the Archbishop was trying to address is the issue of I suppose a rising tide of fairly militant secular law that tends to marginalise religious minorities, and Christians and Muslims alike, and push them to a place with which they may not be at all comfortable. And he's trying to say, in a plural society such as we have, how do we accommodate people of different religious and indeed therefore moral and ethical conviction? But how do we keep them under one law while maintaining the distinctiveness of different positions? Now that's a very complicated thing to do, hence his argument was very complicated and not, I think, very well understood.
But given the perception of Sharia law in Britain and in the West, whether it's a distorted perception or not, it was bound to cause outrage, wasn't it?
I think it was. I think it was. I think the Archbishop's big mistake was to go on the radio in advance of this fairly academic speech to Muslim scholars and legal experts and come up with talk about Sharia law without really explaining it, and to say that its introduction was inevitable. Now that was bound to stir up a hornet's nest, because it raises all sorts of unhelpful images of beheadings and public whippings and people having their hands cut off.
But such a hornet's nest that even his predecessor, Lord Carey, was stirred to say that he couldn't share the view that Britain will have eventually to concede some place in law for aspects of Sharia. He said there can be no exceptions to the laws of our land, which have been so painfully honed by the struggle for democracy and human rights.
I personally, I think that he might live to regret those words, because frankly, if you have a legal system which, for instance, insists that members of faith groups go along with a body of law with which they're not happy, then you might well want to say, actually, I don't think one body of law will do for everybody. There have to be exceptions. So, for instance, if you're a Christian doctor and you find yourself in the position in which you're forced to conduct an abortion or forced to terminate someone's life, to the extent that someone could prosecute you, sue you in the civil courts for refusing that, then the argument of one law for all suddenly becomes rather uncomfortable, I think, and it's that kind of issue that the Archbishop was trying to redress.
This feeds into the wider debate about how to integrate minority cultures into any society, but in this case into Britain, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely it does. And the answer in France has been essentially to say everyone is a citizen. We are blind to issues of ethnicity. The answer in the UK over the last 20, 30 years has been to adopt the whole philosophy of multiculturalism and assume that if you treat all cultures as equal, then everyone will assimilate very happily and it'll all become some nice, happy mix together. Now, sadly, that has been proved to be false, and the London bombings of a couple of years ago really put paid to that whole argument.
Well, many are saying now it's created a sort of ghettoisation of cultures in Britain. How do you get around that?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I heard not long ago that a number of councils in the UK are very fearful about not providing translation services for minorities because they fear that they could be prosecuted under equal rights legislation, whereas thoughtful members of those communities are saying, look, by doing this, you're just ghettoising us. You're pushing us off
sort
to
of an
one
inverted
side.
form of racism.
Yeah, exactly so. And I think the issue that we have to ask is what kind of a society do we want to live in? How do we live in a society which has cohesion, has social cohesion, legal cohesion, but actually allows space for diversity and difference of opinion? And the Archbishop's phrase was a system of tolerant diversity. And that was really what he was trying to advocate. The alternative, I suppose, is to go back to the old Judeo-Christian tradition of law that simply says, this is the law, these are the principles on which it's founded, and we will not fundamentally divert from that. And that, I think, is probably what someone like Lord Carey is hoping that we might do.
One of the criticisms of what he was saying is that it ignores the diversity of Islamic culture and Islamic law. There isn't one Sharia, that it reflects cultural differences from place to place. Well, that's a problem too, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That is absolutely a problem, and I think the popular perception is that Sharia is a body of law, whereas I think it's probably truer to say that Sharia is a method of doing law, and because it's a method, it's flexible.
Going to have to interrupt you there, I'm afraid. We've run out of time. That's all we have time for today. Thanks to our guest, the Reverend Philip Mount Stephen of St Michael's Church here in Paris. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.